Hello all, today's episode 11, continues part 12 initially, and I'm going to be looking in Jezebel's at chapter 31, which we started last time, through to aspects of chapters 31 to 38. I want to have a look here at narrative structure and communication. If you are appreciating this, please like, subscribe, hit the bell. So we've spoken a couple of times thus far about the concepts of duality and doubling, the doppelganger, or different facets and categories of doppelganger. So some examples here from chapters 36 and 37. He, the commander, holds a large silver mirror for me. I recognise it as Serena Joy's. The coat is light blue, perhaps consider the Virgin Mary, the colour for wives. This too must be Serena's. We do have something in common. Both of us are supposed to be invisible. Both of us are functionaries. I know where I am. I've been here before, with Luke. It was a hotel then. Now it's full of women, the brothel Jezebels. So this is a pretty broad, challenging question. But what could the function of duality be within the novel? You've got these different categories that I've given you a few episodes ago. The idea of somebody else having such a similar appearance to another person as to be like an identical twin is the most common contemporary definition of doppelganger that we have. Offred and Offglen, or any other handmaid, equates, if we're going to thematically closely analyse it or make an argument about it for assessment objective 1, equates to the removal of individuality, removing the power to rebel. A duality between Offred and Serena, invisible functionaries to the commander. A duality between Luke and Nick, Offred's lovers. That might not be quite as useful unless we are analysing her sense of shame. A character who represents everything that our core character abhors or hates. Offred, when she is leaving Serena to join Nick, even when they're colluding over the prospect of trying to get fertilisation, Offred describes Serena as my obverse, my opposite. Victor Frankenstein and the Creature. A character that possesses a personality characteristic or trait that our core character lacks, thus complementing them, being somehow able to complete a flaw and help them in their cause or quest. Nick, is this to Offred? Clerval, is that to Frankenstein? Do all of these characters share the mirrored parallel trait of a desire for communication and companionship? And is that a strong objective 4 comparative link that we could make between the two novels? So I'm conscious that we're accelerating through the novel a little more now. So a brief overview and summary of part 12. Serena Joy proposes that Nick be an alternative conception strategy, assuming him more likely fertile than her husband. And so there's essentially a clandestine collusion between Serena and Offred, perhaps rendering them doppelgangers in one way or another. Offred has a series of clandestine meetings with the commander, And Offred proposes that becomes an opportunity to spy on him for the benefit of the May Day resistance movement. The commander smuggles Offred out of the house, initially disguised as a wife, then disguised as a prostitute, to the brothel Jezebel's, before her disguise therefore becomes that of a Jezebel, a prostitute or evening rental. She feels like a refugee from the past. The outfits are demeaning male fantasies, showing a power dynamic in favour of the male. Better never means better for everyone, the commander says. It always means worse for some. This is reminiscent of Orwell's Animal Farm. All animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. We witnessed the Pravaganza, arranged marriages. Later generations won't remember the prior freedom. Offred is encouraged by Offred to spy. She doesn't want to tell the details of the attempt to get across the border again. Is she a reliable narrator? And in Jezebel, she says, I try to remember if the past was exactly like this. I'm not sure now. I know it contained these things, but somehow the mix is different. I can't remember exactly because I had no way of writing it down. Moira then gives an account because Offred encounters Moira, recaptured, now functioning as a prostitute in Jezebel's, and she gives an account of her failed escape attempt. She suppresses details. I won't tell you how, because some of the stations may still be operating. It's safer not to know so that she can't be tortured out of the information. But it frustrates us again. We're on the periphery in this oppressed, suppressed, repressed regime. It was before the sectarian roundups began in earnest. They got me as far as Salem. We know that has a Puritan parallel to the witch trials of the 17th century. She was threatened with the toxic colonies and had to become a prostitute. The Mosaic narrative style means that we don't learn her ultimate fate, but I would like to zoom in on that in greater detail shortly. So at the end of chapter 36, the commander and Offred are going to Jezebel's. Here, the commander says, he slips around my wrist a tag, purple on an elastic band, like the tags for airport luggage. If anyone asks you, say you're an evening rental, he says. He takes me by the bare upper arm and steers me forward. What I want is a mirror to see if my lipstick is all right, whether the feathers are too ridiculous, too frowsy. In this light I must look lurid, though it's too late now. Idiot, says Moira. In chapter 38, in Jezebel's, the brothel, when Offred goes to the bathroom, she comes across Moira, and Moira is, having been captured again, unfortunately, she is living out her time as a prostitute, and she fills us in on a few details. She says that she won't tell how she got as far as she got, because some of the stations may still be operating. We still, even with this insight, get a suppression of details. Quakers, the underground female road, the sectarian roundups beginning in earnest. The idea in the earlier time that you could claim Christianity, or if you were a married woman you were all right for a time. she'd almost got out. She'd got as far as Salem. That's a parallel that Atwood deliberately uses to reference the Puritan witch trials of the 17th century. And toward the end of, or at the very end of, chapter 38, we come to this. And again, the concept is the idea of desire to construct or reconstruct being foiled. Here is what I'd like to tell. I'd like to tell a story about how Moira escaped, for good this time. Or if I couldn't tell that, I'd like to say she blew up Jezebel's with 50 commanders inside it. I'd like her to end with something daring and spectacular, some outrage, something that would befit her. But as far as I know, that didn't happen. I don't know how she ended, or even if she did, because I never saw her again. Such is the suppression of this regime that we must just fit together the mosaic, the jigsaw pieces, and be left with our questions unanswered. So I've described this novel as a mosaic, something that you have to piece together because of the analeptic shifts making it rather like a jigsaw. The strands, because we later learn that it's a transcription, is in a guest order from the hidden cassette tapes unearthed by the historians. The reader has to piece this together. There are a series of strands. Aunt Lydia and training. Nick. Offred the commander and Serena. Luke and Offred's daughter. Offred's mother. Moira, both now and in the past. The other handmaids. Public rituals and ceremonies. Walking partners, everyday life, Offred's internal strand, the night sections. This also means that there are a lot of different voices within the character of Offred. Introspective, retrospective, rebellious, compliant, all manner of other things. It makes it difficult to piece together. You've got to do the job within your argument of making that transition from GCSE to A-level, whereby you are not just doing close analysis in isolation, but making selections that give a selective, broad overview, resulting in an insightful argument. I want to start building one of these broadly linked arguments together with you. I'm going to draw that partly from Part 13 Night, consisting of Chapter 40, partly from Chapter 41 of Part 14 Salvaging, partly from the first page, partly from some pieces of Chapter 15 and the historical notes. That sounds complex, but I'll guide you through it. So this essay plan is going to go over a hell of a number of slides, and you might have to go back over this a little bit once we've done some close reading of the relevant sections. Chapter 40 is one of the 7 night sections in the novel, and Offred gives 2 or 3 different accounts here of her sexual encounter with Nick, and she follows each with the statement, "It didn't happen that way." How does that affect our response to Offred and her narrative? So I actually want the sexual encounters with Nick to be the opening part of our argument and analysis. And then we are going to shift back to the very opening page and zoom in on that imagery of the gym being repurposed being a palimpsest, and draw comparison between the way that she talks about it didn't happen like that, it being a reconstruction, and the whole tale being a palimpsest of sorts, a reconstruction. Complex, I know, but bear with me, I'm trying to challenge here. Then, for the third section, I want us to shift into the historic notes, the way that that really reveals this palimpsest idea. In the opening 6 paragraphs of chapter 41, immediately after the sexual encounters, Offred describes her narrative as limping and mutilated, and I want to look at how that imagery relates to the structure of the Handmaid's Tale in and of itself. That will bring us into this link to the revelations in the historic notes. I've sort of muddled and inverted that myself a bit there, so I hope that's clear. We're starting with chapter 40, the sexual encounters. We are moving back to page 1, the palimpsest, and that idea of reconstruction that she really confesses to at the beginning of chapter 1 with this limping, mutilated narrative and her hope and desire. I tell, therefore you are, that her husband has survived. How all of this reconstruction links to the historical notes and this idea of the palimpsest transcription thematically resonating, because the historian doesn't care about her individual story, he simply wants accurate testimony. Can we also link that to the Chinese box structure, the meta, intra and extra diegetic layers of Frankenstein? And this chopping and changing cutting room idea of transcription of tapes potentially linking to the creature itself? To what extent is it important that writing and communication are seen as forms of resistance within the Handmaid's Tale? The importance of witnessing and retelling the truth in the face of the indoctrination of propaganda. Is the fragmentation of the narrative really unstructured, or is it merely an illusion that Atwood creates? It hurts me to tell it over and again, witnessing and retelling what's being said here about the importance of human communication. This might seem big and overwhelming, it might seem complicated, but let's take it piece by piece, and I will guide you through the way that you could make links, 4, 5, 6 of them, across the whole novel for this particular argument, just as an example. Just have a quick skim read, please, of my selection of key quotations here from the sexual encounter with Nick. I will go into more detail on this when I give the reading on the next slide, but I just want you to dwell on it silently for a little period of time. So section 13 is another recurrence of night, but instead of being her mental dwelling on things, the dynamic in this night section shifts. It becomes a much more active passage. In chapter 40, prior to this, the wife, Serena Joy, has arranged with Offred that she will clandestine collude with, meet with Nick the chauffeur in an attempt to reproduce with a fertile man. The searchlights are off, which is not usual. A power failure, or else Serena Joy has arranged it. I sit in the darkness. No point in having the light on to advertise the fact I'm still awake. I'm fully dressed in my red habit again, having shed the spangles, scraped off the lipstick with toilet paper. I hope nothing shows. I hope I don't smell of it, or him either. Not just to not be discovered, but out of shame, or out of fear of being judged by Nick. She's here at midnight, as she said she'd be. I can hear her, a faint tapping, a faint shuffling on the muffling rug of the corridor before her light knock comes. I don't say anything, but follow her back along the hall and down the stairs. Doppelgängers colluding together. There's some pathetic fallacy going on here with a thunderstorm in the background as well. Infrared, she's thinking about detection, surveillance, being caught. She can walk faster. She's stronger than I thought. Her left hand clamps the banister, in pain maybe, but holding on, steadying her. I think she's biting her lip. She's suffering. She wants it all right, this baby. I see the two of us, a blue shape, a red shape, in the brief glass eye of the mirror as we descend. Myself, my obverse, that category of doppelganger whereby one is the element that the other hates, and yet there's sympathy and sensitivity here on Offred's part. We go out through the kitchen. It's empty. A dim night light's left on. It has the calm of empty kitchens at night. The bowls on the counter, the canisters, the stoneware jars loom round and heavy through the shadowy night. The knives are put away into their wooden rack. I won't go outside with you, she whispers. Odd to hear her whispering, as if she is one of us. Usually wives do not lower their voices. You go through the door and turn right. There's another door. It's open. Go up the stairs and knock. He's expecting you. No one will see you. I'll sit here. She'll wait for me then, in case there's trouble, in case Cora and Rita wake up. No one knows why. Come in from their room at the back of the kitchen. What will she say to them? That she couldn't sleep. That she wanted some hot milk. She'll be a dwat enough to lie well, I can see that. The commander's in his bedroom upstairs, she says. He won't come down this late, he never does. That's what she thinks. I open the kitchen door, step out, wait a moment for vision. It's been so long since I've been outside, alone at night. Now there's thunder. The storm's moving closer. What has she done about the guardians? I could be shot for a prowler. Paid them off somehow, I hope. Cigarettes, whiskey. Or maybe they know all about it. Her stud farm. Maybe if this doesn't work, she'll try them next. From chauffeur to guardian, through the servants, to breed. A stud farm? Having horses for breeding the right genetics of race horses. So, is there a point about humanity here? This rapid succession of sexual encounters would make for an uncertain paternity if a conception was successful. The door to the garage is only steps away. I cross, feet noiseless on the grass, and open it quickly, slip inside. The stairway is dark, darker than I can see. I feel my way up, stair by stair. Carpet here. I think of it as mushroom-coloured. This must have been an apartment once, for a student, a young single person with a job. A lot of the big houses around here had them. A bachelor, a studio, those were the names for that kind of apartment. It pleases me to remember this. Separate entrance, it would say on the ads. That meant you could have sex unobserved. I reach the top of the stairs, knock on the door there. He opens it himself. Who else was I expecting? There's a lamp on, only one, but light enough to make me blink. I look past him, not wanting to meet his eyes. Through shame? It's a single room with a fold-out bed, made up, and a kitchenette counter at the far end, and another door that must lead to the bathroom. This room is stripped down, military, minimal, no pictures on the walls, no plants. He's camping out. The blanket on the bed is grey and says US. He steps back and aside to let me past. He's in his shirt sleeves and holding a cigarette, lit. I smell the smoke on him, in the warm air of the room, all over. I'd like to take off my clothes, bathe in it, rub it over my skin. No preliminaries. He knows why I'm here. He doesn't even say anything. Why fool around? It's an assignment. He moves away from me, turns off the lamp. Outside, like punctuation, there's a flash of lightning. Almost no pause, and then the thunder. He's undoing my dress, a man made of darkness. I can see his face. I can hardly breathe, hardly stand, and I'm not standing. His mouth is on me, his hands, I can't wait, and he's moving. Already, love, it's been so long. I'm alive in my skin again. Arms around him, falling and water softly everywhere, never ending. I knew it might only be once. I made that up. Through shame, to cover her worry of infidelity. This isn't the same as having to with the commander. She thinks of Luke, perhaps, in the back of her mind. It didn't happen that way. Here is what happened. Is she reliable? Do we trust her? She seems to be being honest about her emotional need to cover shame. I reach the top of the stairs, knock on the door. He opens it himself. There's a lamp on. I blink. I look past his eyes. This repetition, again conveying the concept of reconstruction, the palimpsest, that histories can be rewritten. Don't suppose things to simply be at face value. It's a single room. The bed's made up, stripped down, military. No pictures, but the blanket says US. He's in his shirt sleeves. He's holding a cigarette. Here, he says to me. Have a drag. No preliminaries. He knows why I'm here. To get knocked up. To get in trouble. Up the pole. Those were the names for it once. I take the cigarette from him, draw deeply in, hand it back. Our fingers hardly touch. Even then, that much smoke makes me dizzy. He says nothing, just looks at me unsmiling. It would be better, more friendly, if he would touch me. I feel stupid and ugly, although I know I'm not either. Still, what does he think? Why doesn't he say something? Maybe he thinks I've been slutting around at Jezebel's. Shame. Fear of judgment. Perhaps a link to Frankenstein's creature there? Slutting around at Jezebel's with the commander or more, judgment. It annoys me that I'm even worrying about what he thinks. Let's be practical. I don't have much time, I say. This is awkward and clumsy. It isn't what I mean. I could just squirt it in a bottle and you could pour it in, he says. He doesn't smile. There's no need to be brutal, I say. Possibly he feels used. Possibly he wants something from me. Some emotion, some acknowledgement that he too is human, is more than just a seed pod. A bit like her mother's attitude to fertility and insemination. I know it's hard for you. I try. He shrugs. I get paid, he says. Punk surliness, an emotional defence. But still makes no move. I get paid, you get laid, I rhyme in my head. So that's how we're going to do it. He didn't like the makeup, the spangles. We're going to be tough. You come here often? And what's a nice girl like me doing in a spot like this? I reply. We both smile. This is better. This is an acknowledgement that we're acting. For what else can we do in such a setup? Abstinence makes the heart grow fonder. We're quoting from late movies, from the time before. And the movies then were from a time before that. This sort of talk dates back to an era well before our own. Not even my mother talked like that. Not when I knew her. Possibly nobody ever talked like that. In real life, it was all a fabrication, a reconstruction from the beginning. Romanticism. Still, it's amazing how easily it comes back to mind, this corny and falsely gay sexual banter. I can see now what it's for, what it was always for. To keep the core of yourself out of reach. Enclosed, protected, an emotional defence barrier. I'm sad now. The way we're talking is infinitely sad. Faded music, faded paper flowers, worn satin, an echo of an echo, all gone away, no longer possible. Without warning, I begin to cry. At last he moves forward, puts his arms around me, strokes my back, holds me that way for comfort. Come on, he says, we haven't much time. With his arms around me, my shoulders, he leads me over to the fold-out bed and lies me down. He turns down the blanket first. He begins to unbutton, then to stroke, kisses my ear. No romance, he says. Okay. And then we get something of a semantic change. That would have meant something else once. Once it would have meant no strings. Now it means no heroics. It means don't risk yourself for me if it should come to that. And yet he will risk himself to help her. And so it goes. And so. I knew it might only be once. Goodbye, I thought. Even at the time. Goodbye. There wasn't any thunder, though. I added that in, to cover up the sounds which I'm ashamed of making. She's ashamed of her sexual pleasure with Nick, as infidelity to Luke. The thunder covers the sounds, the reaching of climax or orgasm, perhaps, the pleasure, the groans. And yet, the second time that she says it didn't happen like that either, she doesn't then recreate all of this. She just says, I'll be honest about the thunder. We can trust the reliability of this woman as narrator, I think. Or can we? It didn't happen that way either. I'm not sure how it happened. Not exactly. All I can hope for is a reconstruction. The way love feels, it is always only approximate. It might be slightly different, but it's a bit like us coming up with that punchline a couple of minutes too late. Is it of that great a consequence for us to mistrust her? I, as a reader, certainly hope not. Partway through, I thought about Serena Joy, sitting down there in the kitchen, thinking, cheap, they'll spread their legs for anyone. All you need is to give them a cigarette. And I thought afterwards, this is a betrayal of her husband. Not the thing itself, but my own response. This is the first time she's taken sexual pleasure in years. If I knew for certain he was dead, would that make a difference? I would like to be without shame. She doesn't want to suffer the shame. I would like to be shameless is a double meaning. If we call somebody shameless, we think that they're loose morally, that they're promiscuous. It's a play on words for her. I would like to be ignorant. Then I would not know how ignorant I was. If she wasn't intelligent enough to know all about this, she wouldn't have to feel ignorant of things like her husband's death, perhaps. So I want this analysis of the encounter with Nick to be part 1 of your longer essay. Chapter 40, the night section, where Offred gives the 2 different accounts of this sexual encounter with Nick, following each with it didn't happen that way. What are her emotional reasons and needs for this, and how does that affect our response to Offred and her narrative? Once you've dealt with the couple of pages on the last slide and this couple of pages here on this slide, the second section of our analysis, link that concept of her deliberately rewriting, but honestly showing this rewriting to allow us to infer her motives, to the imagery of a palimpsest that's raised in page 1 of chapter 1. Do you consider her unreliable? I don't. How does this link forward to the revelation at the end, and what the regime does in purposing things. Then, for the third section of our analysis, I want to examine the character of Pieixoto in the historical notes. How is he presented, and what are his main concerns in examining the transcripts of Offred's tape recordings? What do you detect about Atwood's attitude to him? What's his tone and function within the novel? In what ways has society changed since the Gileadian era? And what lessons have been learned as opposed to those which have not? So we finally reach the historical notes that I've alluded to again and again and again throughout this course. The historical notes seem to establish a denouement, a culmination, a tying up of not that many loose ends to the story that seems to restore a social equilibrium, a society that we recognise. But some underlying issues of sexism remain. Some lessons have not been learned. This being a partial transcript of the proceedings of the 12th Symposium on Gileadian Studies, held as part of the International Historical Association Convention, which took place at the University of Deny None of It on June 25, 2195. None too subtly, deny none of it, the historian Pieixoto depicted does not seek to learn moral lessons from this. He is denying things. The chair is Professor Mary Ann Crescent Moon, both a woman and a Native American. So our denouement seems to re-establish a society where women are respected and have status, and where there is not segregation according to race, at least up to a point. Our keynote speaker is James Darcy Pieixoto. Atwood, as I've said before, lifts this Portuguese name from a Brazilian South American novel, and the character in that novel is reincarnated century after century. I think this is to allude to the idea of his misogynistic sexual attitudes carrying over. He hasn't learnt these lessons morally. Crescent Moon introduces him as his talk being, I'm sure, worthwhile, when actually I think we as readers are inclined to compare it with the novel and disagree. Rather like in Frankenstein, we might disagree with Victor Frankenstein's views once we've heard from the creature. Crescent Moon also gives us the information that this is a transcription. And so begins Pieixoto's talk. Thank you. I'm sure we all enjoyed our charming Arctic char last night at dinner, and now we are enjoying an equally charming Arctic chair. He is patronising the female professor. I use the word enjoy in two distinct senses, precluding, of course, the obsolete third, sexual joke, misogynistic. But let me be serious. I wish, as the title of my little chat implies, the problems of authenticating the tale. He is concerned chiefly about its historic accuracy, not the social or emotional content of the story. The title implies to consider some of the problems associated with the soi-disant manuscript. He uses the French soi-disant, meaning literally so-called. He doesn't consider it a manuscript. On the one hand, it's not, because he's transcribed it from tapes, but he's saying it in a derogatory, dismissive way. It goes by the tale, The Handmaid's Tale. I say soi-disant because what we have before us is not the item in its original form. Strictly speaking, it was not a manuscript at all when first discovered, and bore no title. The superscription, The Handmaid's Tale, was appended to it by Professor Wade, partly in homage to the great Geoffrey Chaucer of the Canterbury Tales. But those of you who know Professor Wade informally, as I do, will understand when I say that I'm sure all puns were intentional, particularly that having to do with the archaic vulgar signification of the word tale, that being to some extent the bone, as it were, of contention, triggering applause and laughter. Tale, story, he diminishes the authenticity. He doesn't consider it testimony of the time, just a woman's story. Tale, here, the archaic vulgar significance, a double entendre, a double meaning of penis, a phallic joke, and bone, erection. So his sexual jokes cast him as the misogynist. He's not learning the moral lessons that Atwood would seek that we did of atrocities so that history doesn't repeat itself. I hesitate to use the word document because it was unearthed on the site of what was once the city of Bangor, in what, at the time of the inception of the Gileadian regime, would have been the state of Maine. So she was moving up toward the Canadian border? We know that this city was a prominent way station on what the author refers to as the Underground Female Road, since dubbed by some of our historical wags as the Underground Frail Road. Laughter and groans. These women were moving from safe house to safe house to get out of an oppressive regime. They were strong, they were resisting, and he misogynistically refers to them as frail. Atwood's own more poignant parallel here is that she is paralleling the Underground Railroad, an actual network of safe houses that was designed to get people out of slavery in a clandestine way. There were approximately 30 cassettes, obsolete sometime in the 80s or 90s with the advent of the compact disc. And so, with the aid of our excellent resident antiquarian technician, we constructed a machine capable of playing such tapes, and immediately set about the painstaking work of transcription. There were some 30 tapes in the collection altogether, with varying proportions of music to spoken word. In general, each begins with 2 or 3 songs as camouflaged and labelled with musical titles. Their transcription renders it a palimpsest. Thus it was up to Professor Wade and myself to arrange the blocks of speech in the order in which they appeared to go. Once we had the transcription, we had to go over it several times, owing to difficulties posed by accent, obscure references, archaisms. He doesn't really understand. Several possibilities confronted us. Could they be a forgery? Why would there be such a thing? If I may be permitted an editorial aside, allow me to say that in my opinion we must be cautious about passing moral judgments upon the Gileadians. Surely we have learned by now that such judgments are of necessity culture specific. Atwood sets up here Pieixoto as a counterpoint to her position. His softened detachment thinks that her personal story as an individual is irrelevant to his anthropological social study. He doesn't consider her reliable. He's not concerned with her individually, but with objective historic accuracy. He's quite absurd in his supposing them to be genuine or not. his transcription shifts her story into history, and that very attitude of ignoring the moral judgments we might make, just as we might miss the allusions in Atwood's novel of purple placards alluding to gay victims of the Holocaust, the specifics of Amon Gert and Ruth Calder, the allusion to the SS St. Louis, the Jewish ship, the cattle prods evoking the civil rights movement, Puritans, witch hunts, slavery, then we are allowing history to be forgotten or written over, manipulated like a palimpsest so that we don't learn, and the next atrocity that comes along allows history to repeat itself. As part of the third section of your analysis, Pieixoto's warnings of caution in casting moral judgment is the opposite of Atwood's message. He's not learning from historic mistakes, and thus he's ignoring and writing over history. He's creating a palimpsest, like the gym hall of the school should be for that original purpose, not a dorm for handmaids. That could be one of your possible opportunities to bring in some close analysis where you demonstrate how subtle and clever your close engagement between close language analysis and socio-historic context for assessment objective 3 is. You could bring in the purple placards and the gender traitors as the gay victims of the Holocaust when we automatically begin and end our thinking with the Jewish victims, not to diminish that in any way, of course. You could bring in the people who are fleeing the Gileadian regime as refugees, faking looking Jewish, as a horrible counter to the history, very precisely, of the SS St. Louis or Lewis. You could do some analysis of the human themes of Offred's dynamic with the commander and compare them to Ruth Calder's denial of shame or regret in her relationship with Amon Gert, and link in that real life suicide. Show your knowledge. Or any of the other more generic allusions to Puritanism, to slavery, to civil rights, to other kinds of segregation and oppression. Of course, ensure that when you're doing this, you are making sure that you are incorporating that into your assessment objective 1. What is your core argument as per the theme stated in the exam question? That brings us to part 4 of our essay analysis. By careful selection of quotations, trace the gradual development of Offred's relationship with the reader, starting with the defensive barrier that she puts up, that distant, detached tone of, I try not to think too much, thinking can hurt your chances and I intend to last. Moving through that middle section where she says, I believe he was shot dead so that he didn't suffer. I also believe that he's incarcerated somewhere. I also believe that he got across the border and was helped by the resistance movement or joined the resistance movement. These 3 things cannot all be true at once, but I believe them all. Right the way through to the much more fully engaged tone of by telling you anything at all, I'm at least believing in you. I believe you are there. I believe you into being. Because I'm telling you this story, I will your existence. I tell, therefore you are, using the philosopher Descartes, or twisting the philosopher Descartes, as a means of asserting her hope for Luke's survival. I'm going to go into greater detail of close analysis of that concept in the next couple of slides. So immediately after the sexual encounter with Nick that she retells, it didn't happen that way, over and over again she says, it didn't happen that way, I made it up, here's what happened. And then again, it didn't happen that way either, this multiple concepts of the palimpsest, of reconstructing. We get the beginning of section 14, Salvaging. And in the opening of chapter 41, she says, I wish this story were different. I wish it were more civilized, showed me in a better light. If not happier, at least more active, less hesitant, less distracted by trivia. I wish it had more shape, about love, sunsets, rainstorms, birds, romanticism. And so she goes on to say, I'm sorry there is so much pain in this story. I'm sorry it's in fragments, like a body caught in crossfire or pulled apart by force. A story in fragments, a parallel with Frankenstein? But there is nothing I can do to change it. I've tried to put some of the good things in as well, flowers for instance, because where would we be without them? Things of little consequence. Nevertheless, it hurts me to tell it over again. Once was enough. Wasn't once enough for me at the time? But I keep on going with this sad and hungry and sordid, this limping and mutilated story, because after all, I want you to hear it, as I will hear yours too if I ever get the chance, if I meet you or if you escape, in the future or in heaven or in prison or underground, some other place. She calls her story here Limping and Mutilated. The semantic field is of physical disability, injury by sharp objects, mutilated, limping. I think this is a subtle allusion again to the idea of the tail, which she has just wished to be having greater shape, actually being disguised on multiple cassette tapes and thus chopped up and transcribed, limping and mutilated, by Professor Pieixoto, the historian. The you could still be a generic listener. If I ever get the chance to meet you or if you escape, could equally and more literally, more explicitly be Luke, especially since she's just in the prior page spoken of her shame regarding whether or not he may be dead and whether her sexual activity with Nick is infidelity. But what they have in common is they're not here. By telling you anything at all, I'm at least believing in you. I believe you're there. She's already said, I believe he was quickly shot dead. I also believe he's incarcerated somewhere. I simultaneously believe a third option, that he crossed the border to a resistance group. I believe you're there. I believe you into being. Because I'm telling you this story, I will your existence. I tell, therefore you are. She is definitely, in my view, addressing Luke at this point, citing Descartes' cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am, not being able to doubt one's own existence, or not being able to doubt Luke's existence if you're thinking about him and telling him the story. And so I will go on. I will myself to go on. I'm coming to a part you will not like at all, because in it I did not behave well, but I will try nonetheless to leave nothing out. After all you've been through, you deserve whatever I have left, which is not much, but includes the truth. This is the story then. I went back to Nick, time after time, on my own, without Serena knowing. It wasn't called for, there was no excuse. I did it not for him, but for myself entirely. The historian later asserts that she isn't a reliable source, and yet here she is being so deliberately truthful. So for part 4 of your analysis, in the opening 6 paragraphs of chapter 41, she describes her narrative as limping and mutilated. How does that imagery relate to the structure of the novel overall? How does it link to the revelations in the historical notes, chopping and changing her cassette tapes, being written over as a palimpsest by the historian? To what extent is it important that writing and communication here, I will your existence, are a form of resistance against the regime? A few key quotes here that you might use for that section 4. I will pause myself here to give you a little time to dwell on them. And finally, for the 5th and final part of this longer analysis, is the fragmentation of the narrative really unstructured, or merely an illusion that Atwood creates? How does it convey oppression? Here is what I'd like to tell. I'd like to tell a story about how Moira escaped for good this time. Or if I couldn't tell that, I'd like to say she blew up Jezebels with 50 commanders inside. I'd like her to end with something daring and spectacular, some outrage, something that would befit her. But as far as I know, that didn't happen. I don't know how she ended, or even if she did, because I never saw her again. It's a mosaic that we piece together, and there are pieces missing. We as readers are as repressed, oppressed, suppressed as she is. We don't get to know. This ending point is just a suggestion. You could end with the bit at the end of the testimony of Offred before we go into the historic notes, where she steps into the van, not knowing if she's being arrested or saved, into the darkness or light. Obviously this is just analysis of Handmaids. You could equally link some of this imagery, especially structural, chopping and changing the creature's body as a potential palimpsest, chopping and changing the three-layered structure of the narrative as a comparative link to narrative structure. Later, Nick will be the real helper figure, the complementary doppelganger. "It's all right," he says, "it's Mayday. Go with them. He calls me my real name." And at the end of the novel, having witnessed the real horror in the salvaging of the handmaids in a mob mentality, destroying a man, ripping him apart, executing him violently because he's alleged to have raped a pregnant handmaid. Not the case, he's actually a resistance member who Offred, through mercy, finishes off quickly. We've seen the horrors of the regime. She is hauled off in what looks like a Guardian's van, having told secrets of the state, and we're not sure, and its double doors open and she steps up into the darkness within, or else the light. In the oppression of this regime, this tale, we don't know her fate. It's open-ended to convey that oppression, but at the same time, she must have at least partially escaped to make these recordings. What do you make of that? So I feel like I'm perhaps racing through the end a little bit here, but in the remainder of the novel we see a man executed by the handmaids. He's actually a resistance worker, but Offred gets swept up in the mob mentality of attacking an alleged rapist, allegedly having caused a miscarriage of a handmaid through a rape. It's actually a fabricated story. He is a resistance worker. Offred quickly steps in and finishes him off quickly out of mercy, and she's the one who has to rectify Offred's wrong perception. Thereafter, Offred disappears. She's obviously been found out as a part of the resistance, and she's gone. That's how you can get lost in a sea of names. Offred's. What was her real name? It wouldn't be easy to find her now. Offred then makes a mistake. She tries too quickly to use the Mayday resistance password with a spy, Offred, the new Offred, a new handmaid partner, and as a result she's got to be gotten out fast. She thinks when a van arrives that Nick has betrayed her, but actually he quickly whispers that it's Mayday, he's part of the resistance, he's rescuing her, but he can't appear to be. And although to the commander and his wife Serena it appears that she's being arrested, Offred is probably for the first time in a bit of a position of power, as the commander assumes that he has probably revealed state secrets to her that she's going to then pass on. So that brings us to the end of the core episode content that I want to do. But we have done nothing really on using themes to anticipate possible exam questions. So I want to look in the next episode at exam techniques and exam planning. I will see you then. If helpful, if you're enjoying, please hit the like, please subscribe, please hit the notification bell.